Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this NECE Campus Session. My name is Camelia Tomova, and I will be your host for today. I'm joining you from our hub in Sofia, where we have really the most beautiful autumn, and I hope this is the case for all of you as well, no matter from where you're joining us today. In any case, it seems like the perfect day to be in this space and learn how our surroundings, our communities can become better, and how we, all of us in the room as multipliers, can help make this happen. We at the Civics Innovation Hub are very excited to host an NECE session on community foundations, as this is a topic very dear and very close to our mission as an organization, but also because it's a field where people know so little about, including us from the civil society sector. So in this session, we're going to take a bit of a strategic view of our role as civil society actors, looking at our capacities as creative leaders, as context creators, and basically as multipliers of assets rather than the direct users of community foundations. And by assets, I'm going to quote Alexandra here and say that we don't mean another 10K grant. We mean the real mix that already exists within our work. For instance, the time, the skills, the convening power, the knowledge and the data, the legitimacy, and of course, the resources and networks that we have. So this is pretty much the angle we are going to take, and that will really hopefully inspire us to understand how each one of us can contribute to their own kind of wealth, be it a talent or a resource or something else to help create local agency and a shared sense of responsibility. I am really not going to reveal any further, as we have with us today the best person to talk you through all the magic of it, backed with nearly a decade of support practice with community foundations and place-based actors in Romania, across Europe and beyond. Our speaker, Alexandra Stef, a learning strategist and a participation designer who leads collective learning and innovation at Inspire Institute and consults through collective futures. She is based in Madrid, but she works globally to co-create civic and philanthropic infrastructure that fosters belonging, imagination, and systems change. We are also super proud to have published an interview with Alex in the NECE magazine issue on Hope, of which we'll share the link in the chat shortly. And with that, I'm going to just stop talking. And Alex, thank you so very much for being with us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Cami. And I am humbled and honored by the introduction, and I will try to use as little jargon as possible, because listening to you, I realize all these big words like infrastructure, systems change, imagination, possibility, they sometimes sound heavy and sort of make, create a barrier sometimes for our understanding. So I'll try to keep it very practical, and an open invitation for you is whenever you have a question, please leave it in the chat. I know we will first I will have a bit of a presentation moment, and then hopefully say some good 20 something, hopefully maybe 30 minutes at the end for a conversation. So this is a pretty open space, but then I will guide us through with an initial presentation. Hopefully you can all see my screen.
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Building from what we have refers to a mindset or a worldview that I believe community philanthropy and especially community foundations start from. So it's sort of Also a provocation to maybe shift our needs-based focus. This is very prevalent in civil society. And sort of this is one of the interesting shifts I feel community foundations enable locally, but more on this to come. So you already know about me. I had taken this animation out right before our call, but now it's animated, unfortunately. Maybe let me refresh it so that we don't have jumping text. Okay, the big question, how do we spark change from what we have? So there's not a blank canvas moment. It's always working from where we are, and there are always not enough resources to start. So that's the question. How do we spark things from the present moment? And for this answer, or my take on this answer, comes from the world of philanthropy. And of course, I will not define philanthropy, although it is essentially understood as love of humanity. But I will position this conversation in the world of community philanthropy, and more specifically in the world of community foundations. Community philanthropy is generosity that happens at the local level, between individuals, between groups, very much focused on the local needs or local possibility, very much informed by solidarity, sometimes religious belief, and it takes many, many forms. So it's also sometimes called place-based philanthropy. It can be spontaneous, it can be self-organized in small groups. It isn't generally institutionalized, or we could say that community foundations are an organized, institutionalized form of community philanthropy, which helps it in many ways. One of the ways it helps is by creating a structure and longevity around these acts of generosity, by creating mechanisms for giving and for receiving, by creating governance, by creating partnerships. So it solidifies these acts of generosity that exist in the world in all cultures throughout our history, this community philanthropy. So, okay, what makes a community foundation special? I would say many things. So first of all, I would be referring from my role at Inspire, we work globally with community foundation incubators. So this is an exciting moment for continents at once, or countries within continents that are incubating sometimes their first iterations, their first versions of community foundation. So this is happening globally in several countries in Latin America, several countries in Africa, in Southern Europe, I would say. These are growing movements in Australia. So I am referring to sometimes the concept or the sort of an ideal type of community foundation, but then throughout our conversation, I will spotlight very specific examples. So my take, or our take, on what makes community foundation special is that it allows local giving structured as local funds to cultivate local initiatives, especially new initiatives. So sometimes these funds or the grants are not big, but that makes them perfect to seed new initiatives and to work with new change makers, let's say young change makers, unlikely change makers, with sort of the goal of cultivating local change. So again, in the communities of incubators that we support at Inspire, change is important and transformation is important. It's not just resourcing the ecosystems that exist, but it often is creating new ecosystems that sometimes have a bit different principles behind it. More on this to come. The core thing that I would say community foundations can do differently from a lot of organizations that we are accustomed to, from governments, including from traditional foundations or traditional, let's say, corporate or family philanthropy, is that they take an assets-based approach. In the literature, you can find this as ABCD. I will link all the resources and share them afterwards with you along this presentation, but essentially an asset-based look at the community is what is working, what is strong, what is exciting, what is hidden under the surface, where is there abundance, What are the strengths? What are the talents? What is the expertise? What is the lived experience? And when we say assets, Cami was referring to this, it's really also expanding the range of what counts as an assets, from physical spaces, gathering spaces, schools, education institutions, but also informal spaces, theaters, places of gathering, parks, places that just have a meaning in the community. The history of a community can be an asset, or the tradition, groups, networks, of course, funds, businesses that want to support their community. So talents, opportunities, and also a lot of these assets are sitting under the surface. As we know, you know best working in civic education, sometimes it takes a bit of activation for people to even realize they are surrounded by assets. So I would call this a mentality or a worldview. And perhaps in this tool and tactics conversation, I would say this is the level 0 of it all. So the first tactic is looking at your community, looking at your environment, looking at your field through a lens of assets. This is a further exploration I will not go into, but sort of to show how strategic this view this asset-based lens can be in regards to even how we organize. So there's a profound significance on starting from assets that we will try now to explore to some examples. So tactic number 1, map out and design from assets. Mapping out means conventionally carrying out sort of an asset map exercise, making it participatory, engaging, fun, almost like a treasure hunt activity. These community foundations do these a lot, especially in their early phases where they're just discovering that they want to establish a community foundation. But as a general rule, or sort of as a principle for practice, design from assets. Then I would love to take us also on a geographical exploration. These are some points on the map with some examples that will focus on some startup practice. So as I've mentioned, we work a lot supporting incubators. So these are national entities who are tasked with a big question of how can we stimulate the emergence of local communities in different localities in our country. So it's a big, big question. But there are some interesting practices around this. So supporting new community foundations to emerge. Then there are very interesting approaches to fundraising and asset mobilization, to how they give resources through the form of grants and not only, and also how they stimulate innovation and change. So again, it's generally starting new things rather than keeping existing things going. For this, we will look at examples and we will travel through some continents, starting with Peru. Let's say the national incubator, and I think this is interesting for you to know, has an approach that is, I think, very much inspired by business incubators and accelerators, where teams of entrepreneurs come up with an idea and they sort of registered into this structured approach to be incubated, to receive not only resources, so financial resources, but also mentors, support, connections to develop their idea into a project or into a business in that case. In the case of Peru is interesting because the organization who is in this role, called Mosaico Laboratorio Social, has been very inspired by this approach and actually created something called Incubadora Territorial, territorial incubator, where they select local initiators, local leaders. And I've had the joy of visiting Peru and sort of meeting in workshops some of these leaders, and they're all very young, very talented, very passionate. And actually, many of them were found because Mosaico has communicated this opportunity in the existing networks of business incubators. So that made it easier for them, for Mosaico, to reach out to young people, young adults who had a drive for sort of entrepreneurship, but also this lens of impact, right? It's entrepreneurship for the purpose of developing our communities. So it's something that's working really well. I think they are now at the 3rd edition maybe just launching the 3rd edition, and they have throughout Peru 9 community foundations, either formally registered or about to register. So this is a process that has worked great. The first community foundation was created in Puno. It's called Comunitarios, and they have really explored what it means to start building, including funds. There's an example here from Antonia, which supports entrepreneurship for especially women. This was inspired by the funder's mother. Antonia was his mother, Jimmy's mother, to build funds, so pool assets around the fund that supports female entrepreneurs. So this is an example of Puno going from, we've never heard of community foundations, to learning by actually developing community foundations and gathering funds even before they're formally registered, because they are supported by this incubator. So the incubation approach is really interesting and generative. This is just a bit, again, I will share this is in Spanish, but just to show that it's very structured. So maybe as inspiration for you when you're designing programs, it's set out, again, these 10, 12 months, they have to reach certain milestones. So it is considered that, for example, this is the golden circle of sort of, I think, starting with why, semi-cynic, you can look more into that, but sort of clarifying purpose, doing a territorial mapping, thinking about their budget, their operational budget, but also their fundraising budget, thinking about their governance, and then sort of mapping out how they want to fundraise for the starting capital for them to be formally registered as foundations. A bit about their methodology. It includes a lot of practice sort of challenges of doing a fundraising event, doing grant making. So that's sort of a practical approach. And the tactic here, or the takeaway, I would say, is start small and test different things. So there's not one path of mobilizing assets. There's not one form of asset or community. And it will probably not work in the first go, or it will sound like very small amounts of money mobilized, few people showing up. But the beauty of these exercises is that these entrepreneurial-minded catalysts don't give up, and they try many things. So testing different things, I would say, is a tactic. Another case comes from Romania. Happily, Romania is a success story, especially among or for these countries who do not feel they have a super formalized philanthropic tradition, that do not necessarily have a lot of high net worth individual, or a culture of giving that is similar to maybe the culture in the US or Canada, where communities foundations have existed for 100 years. And the bet in Romania in 2005, when this concept first emerged, was, do we believe there is generosity in communities? Do we believe we can convince regular citizens in small towns in Romania to donate money for something that is fundamentally an entity that regrants? So can we convince people to trust us, an emerging organization called Sibiu Community Foundation, for example, to trust us that we pull money, we pull resources, and we give them back to the community? And again, at the beginning, there were very few yeses, but being creative about the mechanisms through which they can mobilize funds and they can get people to understand and experience what it means to give so that other initiatives could receive funds, that kept going. And actually, by now, of course, Romania, I will go further and then a bit back to show you. Romania is a network of, I believe, 17 community foundations currently. There's been a switch, and some people sort of not reaching the standards of practice, so being excluded for the movement, which also shows you how professionalized the movement is now. But just to show you sort of the map, there are 95 cities that are sort of supported or, yes, receiving grants and resources from community foundations. and something really exciting is this graph, which shows you in 2008, the year I think the first community foundation was established. This is the amount of money the 3 community foundations established then managed to distribute in the community. And this is the exponential growth that you can see over time. So this is also to give a perspective for how you can start really, really small, but over time you grow capacities, resources, and build a network around these community foundations. There's a federation now supporting them. This can become a movement. So the systems change part, that sounds sort of really ambitious, is feasible if you think long term. And so this is 2008, 2021. I didn't have more recent data in English, but I'm happy to find that for you so you can see the path that it's on. It's not a long time. It's 13 years, but in 13 years, you can see that growth. And I will go back just a bit to explain why this actually the sports-based fundraising events have been a success. And it's a mechanism that has been replicated a lot within Romania. So each city sort of figured out its sweet spot. For example, in Bucharest, it's not a marathon, it's a swimathon. In Țara-Făgărașului, this is in the middle of the country, it's a bikeathon. There's many runathons, running in forests, so there are variations. But what happens when you have a community of practice is that once a community foundation tests a prototype and it works, then it spreads in the network because people pick it up at inspiration. So that's also another advantage of not working as a sort of a singular thing, but thinking that you have peers that are each testing their own thing. So creating more sites of experimentation and then learning from each other. And this really took off in Romania. And I wouldn't say that it's because it's a really sporty culture. I wouldn't say that precisely, but it's just that they designed it in a way where everyone of all ages and abilities could participate in the event and feel like they had fun. They did something with their friends and family, and also they became temporary fundraisers. So I will go a bit in depth into this because I think this is also very inspiring. Let me show you a bit of how this works. Again, I will not read through, but just to give you a sense. So what these marathons are, or the way they're designed, is for them to be platforms, which means, or let me go actually to the next screen. The community foundation itself creates the event, so the marathon. Each then causes or projects register to it. They pass an eligibility moment. They are vetted as participating in the event, and then each cause convinces their own fundraisers, and these are generally just friends or people who believe in their organization or in their cause, who then reach out to their friends and to their networks to fundraise for that particular cause. So that makes every runner or many runners also ambassadors and donors. So again, the community foundation creates a context. They empower every cause. For example, if there are, in this case, in the 2023 edition of Sibiu, 47 causes were registered. They receive training and support from the community foundations to learn about sort of fundraising techniques and ways of telling the story. And basically, it also creates capacity in the local civil society to try out fundraising and not fear asking for money if you have a great project or a great cause. So it's not just raising money, but it's also building capacity across the sort of civil society space in that particular city to look at its own community as resources. And this is not just money. Sometimes there's expertise, sort of volunteering of expertise, word of mouth, getting the word out. And also after these events, not only the cities is sort of bursting with energy from all the people who activated basically to either run in the marathon, support a cause, but also it creates this sense of possibility and pride because everybody knows somebody who's either ran, donated, has its own project. So it's really creating a platform rather than just a one-off marathon. You raise the funds and that's it. I will move on just because I have more examples, and then I can leave time and we can go back into any particular examples. So maybe the tactic to take away from here is make it fun, accessible, and rewarding. In this case, fundraising, but I think it can apply to many things. Another example I want to bring is from Serbia, a country very close to Romania and also close in the sense of the approach it had in supporting the incubation of the movement. In Serbia, there are currently 9 community foundations established, and the incubating organization, Trag Foundation, they are also helping incubate community foundation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So again, this network effect of you have some local community foundations that are generating local knowledge on what works. They're testing and prototyping mechanisms. And then this makes it easier then for sort of new cohorts of community foundations to learn from their predecessors and feel they're entering a movement rather than inventing the wheel themselves, right? And what I wanted to highlight from Serbia is the practice of giving grants. Not only So actually, the really cool thing is that these initiative groups, this is how the founding groups are called at the beginning before they're formally registered at foundation. As foundations, they're called civic initiative groups. And these are people from the community, not necessarily wealthy people. Actually, most of the time they are not. They are people who love their community and come from many different sectors. Entrepreneurship, academia, journalism, media, social sector. So it's a mix of people who say, okay, I don't know very well what a community foundation is, but this sounds exciting. I like the people who are starting this, and I believe in my community, and I want to help it sort of be more dynamic. And the Track Foundation supports this initiative groups that even from that moment where they're just a group of people learning about community foundations to give grants in the community. So to have fundraising and grant making exercises where it's the Track Foundation as fiscal host, so that they understand while in the incubation what a community foundation does. So literally is again learning by doing. And that means that when this group of initiators, some of them end up being part of the team of the community foundations or part of the board of community foundations, but in the beginning it's sort of an experiment and they're all sort of allocating roles. This learning happens by practicing these two big roles of the community foundation, raising funds or mobilizing funds and giving out grants. So the giving of grants happens because there's this incredible support from the incubating organization to help them do that, to write open calls, to fundraise, including with events like donor cocktails. So small things, they're not always huge marathons because that of course is costly and takes time to organize, but a sort of a giving circle or a donor cocktail is a way of mobilizing some initial assets. And then another cool incubation tip and trick is that the Track Foundation matches the funds. So whatever is raised locally, the national incubating organization says, we support you and we want to reward your capacity to move money locally by matching these funds. So it's a partnership between these local initiators who want to build a community foundations and the national incubator. And of course, again, this happening at these two levels of the community foundation group being incubated and then itself, the community foundation supporting new initiatives in the community. Other ways of supporting beyond the financial sort of grant that you get is connecting locally, connecting the dots, connecting that same initiative with similar ones that already exist, with expertise that they might not be able to pay for, but the community foundations or the group is generally well connected and knows of people. So they basically also give trust, connections, and credibility to these often small initiatives, often informal groups. So I would say the tactic here is make it fun. No, oh no, I think this is, give trust, connections, and credibility. These are all assets. And I think I'm skipping, okay. This is an example from Sibiu, and it refers to community innovation. The Urban Leadership Academy is a program initiated by the Sibiu Community Foundation, the same one as with the marathon, that is actually not focused on grant making, on fundraising. It doesn't have any of those two sort of traditional community foundation components. It is focused on cultivating the next generation of urban leaders in their city. And the problem statement or the opportunity statement they started from is we have talented young people in our community, but many of these people leave for university, never to return to a bigger city. Let's say Sibiu is like about 250,000 people community. How can we create a virtuous circle or some sense of it's worth staying in the community? And they said, we want to invest in cultivating cohorts of people from working in 3 sectors, so civil society, public administration, and business, for them to feel they have peers and for them to feel somebody's investing in the development, and that because they have these peers who are also making similar bets of saying, I bet in Sibiu, I want to stay in Sibiu, if we connect them, eventually down the road, they will collaborate. And we don't need to pressure for that. We don't need to hold them accountable for that. It will happen. And you'll say, wow, that's very generous, right? It's who believes in this? Well, actually, the Urban Leadership Academy is supported by Technology. This is a local business. It's local, but it's I think quite a, I wouldn't know what the business numbers they have, but they over the years have admired the Sibiu Community Foundation and decided that they're the kind of company that wants to have good human resources, good human quality in their community, and they want to invest in a program like this that does not yield them any immediately direct benefits other than having talented young people in the community stay in the community and work for it. So it's quite an act of generosity. And maybe the tactic here is stimulate new ideas, new people, and new possibilities without having to know what emerges from it. So that's quite an act of sort of trusting emergence and trusting the future. And I don't know how we are for time. Oh, okay. I think these are my last few slides. I wanted to look into the future. So these are examples of practices that are ongoing. Some of them are practices that have been tried and tested. Some of them are more experimental. But there's also, I don't know, okay, these photos of Australia are left there from the template. Ignore, or actually don't even ignore, because I will tell you how this connects. This is a beautiful coincidence I did not prepare for. A group of people working in or around community foundations self-organized around a huddle. A huddle is a peer-to-peer learning format. It's quite intense, I would say. You meet every two weeks with a group of up to 12 people to hold the same question. And in this case, our question was, how might community foundations need to evolve to support community-led change at a time of deep disruption? So basically, we were asking, okay, great, we know the trajectory of community foundations, but what about the future at a time of climate change, authoritarianism, AI disruption? So all of this, how would community foundations, the model, need to evolve? The roles they play in the community need to evolve. So this was an exploration that we were actually, instead of 12, the maximum limit this huddle methodology also allowed, we were 24 people interested to have these conversations, and many of them Australians, so it is connected. This is a coincidence, I swear. So we had 2 parallel huddles for the people who could connect in the time zone of sort of Europe and the transatlantic, let's say, and then Australians and New Zealanders connected amongst themselves, holding this question of what does the future ask of community foundations. And there's a website that you can click on here of sort of what was emerging in our explorations. I hope this leads me to the website. Hopefully I can, okay. We're drawing to a close. These are images of communities of practice, of initiators. This is Peru, this is Romania, this is Bucharest, this is Uganda, this is Peru, this is Colombia. This is happening in many places around the world in very different ways, having this common-ish concept of community foundations. But what they all have in common is that they start from this view of communities are resourceful, are full of talent, full of ingenuity, full of possibility. How can we organize to support that? How can we organize to make that continuously visible? How can we organize that to continuously resource it, to continuously seed new ideas, not just the ones that we think are best, not just the ones that we would love to see, but the ones that are sort of sitting under the surface. And it's not us, although there's a lot of doer energy, there's a lot of sort of civic society activist energy. It's not all on us to do, it's also on stimulating others to become change makers. So the role becomes more of a catalyst for others to emerge in your local community. And this is my final tactic, is find your people. Build communities of practice or connect to existing communities of practice who are curious about the same things you are, or literally developing experiments and prototypes about the things that you want to experiment. And sort of being in community gives an enormous amount of energy. It's an incredible asset. And I wanted to sort of to send back to you. And I know NECE is actually this place for you, holding sort of the big ecosystem and then helping seed and connect people. So this is a beautiful ecosystem, systems changing asset that you actually have very alive in your field. This is a recap, but maybe this is like a takeaway. So yeah, maybe I'll just stop talking and we have a conversation.
Thank you so much for this beautiful presentation and for bringing us into this magic, colorful, rich world of community foundations. It just made me remember one part of your interview where you're saying, when you've seen one community foundation, you've seen one community foundation. They're so, yeah, the variety is just mesmerizing and amazing, but also glad you mentioned, like the major elements that connect all community foundations. And this is, this how to keep this continuity and yeah, become enablers for people who bring change. Thank you so much, Alexandra.